system is so perverted and wanting, we were never taught many of the truths about how we got to be who we are. When we say America, we oftentimes think of the American experience, the American experiment. America, the beacon of hope to mankind, something you'll hear. America, where a governmental and economic system grew and developed and was shaped and formed, but it didn't just come out of nowhere. The affairs of men to have created what we know as this American idea, the rights of man, life, liberty, and property. All men, women, and children individually are precious in the sight of God because all are created in the image of God. That was a brand new idea in the first century, in the early centuries. There was concepts of rights of man in the Greek and Roman systems and philosophies and stuff, but they only flowed to the privileged, the royal families, the people if you're in the right tribe or in the right place of a tribe. It did not flow to every man, woman, and child on earth that ever lived. That's an idea that was brought to us by Jesus Christ and none other. And as the gospel went out from the Middle East all out into the world on Roman roads, it picked up a lot of garbage from the Romans and the Roman roads. Okay, so we have to go read and study some history and understand the historical context of the gospel and its march through history. Well, what happened was the Mayflower Compact established the first government on these shores, and it was a covenantal document. Covenantal is just another word. It's a theological word more for a political word or a legal word called federalism. In fact, they come from the same word, feudus. That is the gift of the Protestant Reformation to all the world, federalism, and which started the dethronement of the idea of the divine right of kings. Okay? It wasn't that many centuries ago where you would be told that the king speaks for God. The word of the king, the command of the king is the command of God, and you must obey under penalties of oftentimes death or lengthy prisons. And that's kind of what we have today, isn't it?
Come on.
We have the United States government, because of a lot of things that have happened that we've let happen, that God's people have let happen, because they were sleeping. The pulpit was asleep or cowardly, or both. Most times when they did wake up, they tucked their tail between their legs and went back to sleep and licked the boots of their master, the state. Okay? Everybody that knows me and knows our work here in this little corner knows that I'm not a real fan of most of the local pastors, and they're not a real fan of me. When I put up on our little sign here a few years ago that the government is filled with criminals because the pulpit is filled with cowards, that pretty well ended any conversation. I'm sorry about that in a way that you feel that way, folks, but if it's not true, make your case. If it's not true, there's plenty of history that proves it to be true. And when I say that, I don't mean every single man who fills the pulpit, but for the most part, they're little panty-waist boys that shave, wearing pink and polka-dotted lace underwear, taking orders from some feminized clown, higher up, or sometimes, who knows, the bigger contributors of their little operation. So anyway, I could go on and on about what's happened in America. I would recommend, if you want to know kind of how this first started rolling downhill in America, a little book called Broken Churches, Broken Nation. And it's a history of how the churches fought the Civil War 40 years before the war broke out in the South, for the secession of the South. It was over the issue of slavery, and the mainline churches argued it and fought it, and they broke up in the exact same configuration as 30 or 40 years later the states would. So that's why you have Southern Baptists and Union Baptists. That's why you have Southern Methodists and Northern Methodists, or Mainline Methodists, and so on and so on. Southern Presbyterians, United Presbyterians. That's why you have that today, because the church could not figure out what Jesus said about owning other people. I think, hello, I mean, you don't have to have a degree in some high-level theological seminary to figure that one out, do you? But that's where they were, okay? And it got very ugly in the churches, and that scar there led to the war for against the states, the war of northern aggression, people call it, civil war, whatever you want to call it, and we're still suffering horribly under what became of us through that. So, from start to finish, the Christian faith is about freedom and liberty, the liberty of man. What happened, a couple of the movements I want to talk about quick. I better get my notes for this. How am I on time? I don't even know. How much time do I have? Does anybody know? Do my thing? I don't know. A friend of mine is here, sent me this quote from Rutherford B. Hayes, our 19th president, who complained in 1888. Most of you know what happened in 1887, I think it was. This is a government of corporations, by corporations, and for corporations. Boy, wish we would have listened to him. Okay. So I want to talk with you just real quickly about four points, and I'll make them quick. I want to talk about the man Jesus. Okay? This is about the man, Jesus. Man and God came down from the heavenly realms into history and radically altered the world. And we are the recipients of so much because of that, even with all the problems that we have. But we have to understand that Jesus himself came to set men free. For freedom, you have been set free. Don't use your freedom for licentiousness or for immorality or for self-serving. Galatians, what's the one in Galatians about freedom? The whole book is about freedom. God set, the story is told about the Garden of Eden. They were set in a position of freedom, father-son relationship that was free and unhindered, but that didn't last long. So we need to recover a right understanding of the man Jesus, the God-man Jesus. And there's been a lot of great people. We honor our founding fathers, even the Romans and the Greeks, the pagans around the world, as we might refer to them, had all kinds of good ideas. And as they say, blind chickens, find something to eat. They find grain. Okay, and that's the way. But Jesus came as the light of the world to show us the way, and he's called the way, the light, and the truth. Okay, so we need to reacquaint ourselves with the biblical man, God-man, Jesus. We need to reacquaint ourselves with the message. So we got the man and the message. His message is freedom for all men, all mankind. Set the world free to have a right relationship with God, and then live out in the beauty and in the abundance of his love. And that way we can love our neighbor, and then we won't be tyrannizing one another. Every time someone goes to the voting booth and votes money out of their neighbor's pocket for something they want, that is tyrannizing. They don't think it that way, and your Christian brethren are just as guilty as anyone else, maybe more guilty, because they want the state to take care of their children. They want the state to keep their kids off drugs. They want the state to educate and medicate and everything else, or build a swimming pool or anything else. They want to take money out of their neighbor's pocket, to provide something that they should provide themselves, and that's tyranny. They don't think of themselves as tyrants. They think of themselves as good citizens. So we have to go back to the message of Christ. Don't steal from your neighbor. Don't step on your neighbor's property. Don't envy and things that are not yours, and try to use the state to, benefit yourself at their expense. The meaning of the message is just that. But since those days, we've been the subject of much mayhem of the message, and that's because it got rolling early on through Roman roads, through a Roman system of top-down ordering of societies and things like that. And God, in His providence, knew what was best for us, and that's how it worked out. But we have to realize what we picked up through that. That was a pietistic movement, and we're just traveling through, we're just pilgrims. This world is not my home. You hear all this nonsense that the scripture doesn't back up. It's bits and pieces of Bible verses jerked out of their historical and cultural context and time context and applied willy-nilly to just about everything. So, and then the escapism, the world's going to get worse and worse, and till Jesus has to come back and fix it. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's not the message. That is not the message. That's mayhem and modern craziness that's been introduced into the message. So, the last, I thought I'd be clever and come up with all the M words. The mission. What is our mission? Well, our mission is the same as the gospel mission was of Jesus. The restoration and redemption of all things. Help people see rightly and understand rightly what we're made for, and then live that way, so that we are in right relation with God through Christ, because He's the only way, and then we can walk that message out by loving our wives and our families, those in our own household, taking care of our own responsibilities, and teaching our neighbors to do so likewise, and encourage our neighbors to do what's right, and help correct some of the errors of the past. So, what happened after after Washington's letters? Well, during the War for Independence, the teachers of America, who were the pastors of the colonial pulpit, who for 150 years trained and taught the people in the colonies covenantal concepts of civil order and life in general. They were hunted down for the most part. Many of the congregants of their churches were officers and soldiers in the local militias that defeated the British. Many of those churches were burned. Many of those men were killed. Families scattered. Properties, farms, and businesses ruined. And there was a void. And so, after the War for Independence was over, you had a massive problem going on with the colonies, because they were all independent countries, literally, and they were all, taxing each other's goods in various ways, and there's all kinds of money that was good or not good depending on the day. It was just chaos, and that's what Washington was arguing about, or complaining about, and remarking about. But it was when the Constitution was adopted that set things aright. Now, those of you who know me know that I have a high view of our founders, all of them, but I don't worship them. And they were men. They were flawed, just like we. But they met in Philadelphia, and they formed, over the course of some months, the Constitution. We have to remember, it was a document, it's a form of government, although very well formed, is not perfect.
That's right. Come on.
And it was formed in a time of crisis, like you heard Washington writing to Madison and Knox. And something had to be done. One of the fears is that the British would either reinvade or possibly some other country, France or even Russia. And so they had to get order. And this little book, if you've never read it, Miracle on Main Street, it's about the money clause of the Constitution, Article 1, Section 10. And that one thing alone brought everything back to a solid normalcy. The people could trade, and the Constitution was adopted. And but then what happened was we had a tremendous flood of immigrants from Europe, people steeped in kind of slavish ideas and culture. And when they got here, there was no pastorate to train them in the biblical arts of liberty and free-thinking people. And so we're suffering from that today. That's what we have today. That's why we have so many of the problems we have today. So my view is, if we can restore the pulpit in America, the teaching institutions, and I don't mean the public school, that needs to be gone away with. But if we can restore the home, with the father in the home, and the church, the place of the pulpit, the men of God, to teach and train young people especially, but their neighbors, on the practice of liberty, that's where we have to work. And that's a long-term process, but I pray that let it begin here. So thank you very much, and I'm going to turn it over to whoever's next.
Thank you. That was very good. Enjoyable. So our next speaker is actually not here, but Nephi's spokesperson, Paul McNeil, is here. So here you go.
I was hoping I'd have a break to prepare something to share. Sorry, Nephi didn't make it. I'll try not to say too much. It's really almost embarrassing being up here. You know, I'm younger than some of these guys, and I've suffered a lot less than some of the people here. I've been through a lot less. And so that's what I want to talk about, is a little bit eventually about maybe process of maturing, and the end of which may be to be quiet. I shared the first night about, talked a little bit about actually my goats, and how we actually met at a park where my goats would get loose and they'd run to sometimes. And I get them back first with a bag of feed, and then eventually I just got them back with a bag. And time again, I can just get my goats back with a bag. And I don't even know if they know that there was ever feed in it. They just know when they see that thing waving, they've connected that image, and they get back in the fence. And how not just animals, but human beings start out that way. We're captivated by images, by songs, by a pacifier. It's a fake nipple. Milk doesn't come out of it, and yet the kid, will just quiet right down, sucking on it. Nothing coming out of it. And how much sometimes all of us, and I'm talking to myself here, we haven't moved past that yet. We see things like the flag waving, and we get excited, and we put our hands on our heart, and we even know what that even represents. You know, images, songs, national anthems, whatever. They connect with us at a visceral level, which is why they're so able to be used to manipulate. It's why organizations over the years, the Nazis, the communists, have been able to use flags and songs to manipulate people. But anyways, that's what I talked about the first night. But so moving on from images and songs, as we grow older, we learn words. We move from words to ideas. But those can be used to manipulate us too, if we're sloppy, if we're lazy. And I really appreciate Miss Rebecca's. What happens as you get older. There's people that are in their 70s that are still like an infant. They have not taken the work, the discipline. And the discipline with words and ideas, it takes work. It's so easy to be manipulated by them. Trust me, in a way, we all do this, right? We manipulate our kids. We manipulate, we try to get people to do things. It's what I do for a living. I'm a negotiator. And I remember I had a friend once told me, he was a clever guy, and he said, Paul, what do you think is the most reliable thing about human beings? Most reliable. And I don't know, what do you think? He says, what's the most reliable aspect of humans? It's their laziness. You can always count on it. And I've made more money off of that thought than anything else. If I'm in a negotiation and I want somebody to buy a house, it's real simple. It's easy. You say, well, I've got a big house or a little house. Or you can go back home and go back looking through ads and maybe go visit other houses, and then maybe the banks will, maybe they won't be able to lend you anymore. Or you can just pick the big house or the little house, and you make the way you want real simple, real easy. And you make the way you don't want to look complicated and difficult and manipulated all the time. All the time. There's million and billion and trillion dollar organizations, not just corporations, governments, forces you're not even aware of, and they're manipulating you all the time. So it takes work. You got to be careful. You got to be thoughtful. And if you mush things together, I was thinking about, I had heard, I have some family that were missionaries in Japan, and they talk about, there's this fish in Japan. It's kind of a puffer fish. And it's simultaneously the most expensive meat out there, and also one of the most poisonous foods out there. And I think 20 to 40, something like that, Japanese are poisoned every year from eating it. And to prepare this fish, these chefs have to train for a long time. It's not like just when you make, hamburger patties, you just mush stuff together, and you throw it on the grill. They have a very sharp knife, and they take their time, and they cut carefully. We're getting ideas thrown at us all the time, and it's always going to be some combination. It's not that simple, guys. The Republicans aren't right and the Democrats aren't wrong. And just all you got to do is think back. Remember when all our conservative friends thought Bush was great? And now we don't like Bush. We like somebody else. And back in the day, the unions were a Republican thing, and then they were a Democrat thing. The ideas are all over the place, and we think, well, it's quite simple. It's not simple. And when you start making it simple, you just like mashing together, like hot dogs. Lord knows what, they just put anything in there, right? And you throw it on the grill. But there's not poison in there, but the things we're eating are like that puffer fish. The good parts, they're the most precious thing out there. But the bad parts are poison. And if you don't cut with a sharp knife, you're going to be poisoned. You're going to die. Your culture, your vision, your family, the ideas, you mash them together, and the little bits of poison in there, you're going to die. And so as I was thinking of sort of the progress, it's a grip of songs, anthems, lullabies, jingles that are used to influence our mind all the time, on television, the images, red, white, and blue, Budweiser, Coca-Cola, the flag flying and people having fun. It infects our minds all the time. And then words, how we're able to use words and not even know exactly what they mean. Liberty. Is that just do whatever you want, take clothes off, run around naked screaming? Is that liberty? Come on. What does it mean? Words used all the time. Capitalism, I think every time I hear it, I think probably 1 out of 8 people actually even know what that means, But we throw these words around. But I guess the bottom line is, there's a phase in life when you need to learn, right? Knowledge is power and all that sort of thing. And that's for knowledge. You know, that first phase, the power of images is important, because certain images you need to be gripped by. You know, your mother's face, you know, that'll be something to be with you the rest of your life, and that's a wonderful thing. But that can be so easily harnessed. And then words, you know, words and ideas, that's how we learn, that's how we gain so much mastery over the world. But wisdom is actually subtractive. Wisdom is when you take that knife out, and you take that fish, and you cut very carefully between the poison and that delicious meat. And it takes time, and it takes patience, like Steve was saying. It takes diligence, and it takes silence. And if you're listening nonstop to television and talk radio and reading and gabbing and thinking and talking, as I am doing all the time, you're not going to get that. You know, and if you think about Christ when he was preparing to his mission, he's going to choose his disciples. He goes out in the desert. He's quiet. He has a chance to think about things and listen. He's able to make that cut just right. That's what we need to do.
Amen.
Well, thank you. That was good. I think we'll take a quick 10-minute break to get some. Is anyone hungry?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, quick 10-minute break to get some food, and then we will resume in a bit. Oh, yeah.
Take the handle if
everyone for being here. And thank you, Roger, for putting this together. For those watching on the internet, you know, this is a very small town, but we got a full tent and people hanging out the back, and it's great to see. And I think it's because people understand now that there's a very serious problem with our relationship with our government and who is supposed to answer to whom. And so I'm glad that you're all here. I think as Americans, we like to look with pride as we look at other countries, and we look around the world and we see in the media oftentimes they report that in this country, they have political prisoners, or they're going after journalists, and you know, they have a tyrannical government because they're going after journalists. And you know, I think it's time that we wake up and face the fact that here in the United States of America, we have political prisoners. And Angela spoke about one of them earlier, Schaefer Cox, and I'm going to tell the story of another one, Jeff Winehouse. And you know, there's people that are losing their. I've been in the cattle business. We've lost our property in Australia. First of all, I'd like to introduce my lovely wife Janet, right back here, and my family, Kate, Abby, Luke, and Will. And yeah, we got attacked by the government in Australia for speaking out and lost our cattle operation. And that's how fighting for property rights is how I came to know some of my friends here. But they suggested that I should go see Jeff Winehouse in prison in Missouri. And, you know, at that time, I had never heard of Jeff Winehouse. And, you know, most people in Missouri have never heard the case of Jeff Winehouse. And that's how controlled the media is. But Jeff Winehouse was a self-proclaimed journalist. And you know, when our founding fathers talked about freedom of the press, they weren't talking about credentialed press, that you have to have credentials or you have to be a government-approved journalist, because each of them wrote their own pamphlets and bulletins, just like Jeff Winehouse does. And our founding fathers understood and believed that in our system of government, it was not only our right to criticize our government, but it was our responsibility. And that's what Jeff Winehouse believed. And Jeff Winehouse was known as the Bulletin Man. He published his own bulletins for over 16 years in a town called Union, Missouri. And he was oftentimes critical of the government. He realized that, and when I say the government, oftentimes we think about the politicians, but really the people that carry a lot of weight are the police and the state highway patrol and the judges and the prosecutors. And no one is supposed to speak against them, but that's what Jeff Winehouse did. And they conducted a raid on his house, and they knocked on the door, and they called him out onto his lawn, and they said after about 30 minutes talking to him, they said that they thought they smelled marijuana. So they went into his house where his office was, and you know, I don't know if they thought that his computers were smoking marijuana or not, but they took his computer that he used to publish his bulletins. And they had him out on his lawn for about 5 hours during this whole search of his house. And eventually they let him back in. And about 3 weeks later, they called Jeff and told him to, this was a highway patrol, the state highway patrol, that was acting outside their jurisdiction and in the jurisdiction of another highway patrol. And the lieutenant in the state highway patrol that ordered the raid on Jeff's house was the cousin of the sheriff that Jeff had been criticizing. So at the time this happened, Jeff was running for the office of coroner, because in Missouri state law, if you're the coroner, you can conduct an inquest and investigate the sheriff. And he was going to investigate the sheriff for wrongful shootings. And there was two of them. Specifically, the most egregious was one, a man named Kelly Brandt that the sheriff had shot. And so Jeff was publishing bulletins about this shooting, and he was running for coroner in order to conduct an inquest. And so this state highway patrol that was connected to the bad sheriff ordered or asked Jeff to come to the gas station to get his computers back. And they testified later they had no intention of ever giving Jeff his computers back. They weren't going to let him publish. And you know, this is why I think the Jeff Winehouse case is so critical, because it's an essential part of the way our system of government works. We have to be able to criticize our government. And what they didn't know when they invited him, so when Jeff got to the gas station, he was shot at point blank range, and he was shot twice in the head and twice in the chest. And what they didn't know at the time, and when the officer that shot him testified in the inquiry the next day, he was unaware that Jeff had a spy watch, a Google watch that was recording the whole thing. And in the run-up, when Jeff was about to arrive at this gas station, he was praying to God the whole time, and he said, God, I don't know whatever nefarious they're going to do to me, but strike it down. Make it not stand. Stand for my defense. Stand for my defense. And they shot him at like 5 feet away, twice in the head, twice in the chest. And miraculously, he survived. And he was in the hospital for 30 days. And the highway patrol, they never came to the hospital while Jeff was there. They never did anything to him. And I was told later that they didn't want to arrest him in the hospital, because then they would have had to pay the hospital bill, which was about $150,000. But about 3 weeks after Jeff got out of prison, he was arrested, and he was later convicted for assaulting the officer that assaulted him. And the officer in question was not assaulted in any way. When Jeff went to the meeting, he did carry a gun, and he had a gun cross-holstered on his left hip. But the officer that shot him told him that he drew his gun from his right side. There was 5 eyewitnesses, including 2 FBI officers that testified under oath, that they saw Jeff from his right side. They never saw a gun. They saw both Jeff's hands in front of him. He never went for the gun. And so it's all on videotape, but yet they managed to convict Jeff on appeal. The appeal failed. He ran a federal habeas case that failed. And one of the things in the federal habeas case they cited as a reason that Jeff was guilty of assault, even though the officer was not assaulted, was they knew that Jeff intended to assault him because he went to this meeting with a gun. And so, if arriving somewhere with a gun it can be used as evidence that you committed a felony, then you don't have a right to bear arms. And so, about 5 years after this happened, the officer that shot Jeff sued the state of Missouri, because they had, after he shot Jeff, they relieved him of his duty. And they did a drug test. This was all unknown to any of us until about 5 months ago. And the day after he shot Jeff, he had to take a drug test, and he failed the drug test because he was on psychotropic drugs to treat post-traumatic stress syndrome. He was on, I think it was Ambien and Prozac. They were both drugs that are known to cause violent tendencies and cited in cases of mass shootings. And he testified under oath that he was under no medication. The State Highway Patrol conducted an inquiry, and the result of their inquiry determined that he was violent and moody, and he intimidated subordinates, and he departed from the truth. And none of this information was ever revealed to Jeff, which I'm sure Roger could tell you is what they call a Brady violation. They're required to reveal to Jeff's side in the court case any evidence that might lead to his acquittal. And they had lots of evidence that they set on. There was an entire cover-up by the Missouri State Highway Patrol and even the Attorney General's office, who was sitting on this information from both cases at the same time. And he knew all this evidence that would have led to Jeff's acquittal, but yet argued against Jeff's habeas petition. So to keep Jeff in jail. And so finally now Jeff has another habeas petition up in state court that's been filed and responded to, and we're hopeful that at long last he might get some justice. But it's been a long road, and it's a very difficult one. And You know, whenever I began visiting Jeff in prison, I just enjoyed all my conversations with him, and we became quite close. And now I talk to him every day. And whenever I talk to Jeff, you know, he's all he can say is he's praying for me. He's praying for Janet. He's praying for Roger Roots. He's the one in jail, and he's always, all his day, he's praying for us. So you know, he's a good man, and I love him to death, and he shouldn't be in jail. And I think, I hope that all of you will take away from this, and you'll support the local politicians that are here, and remember that it is important to stay active, and that it is not only our right, but also our responsibility to hold the government to account. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's pretty good. As a writer and journalist myself, I've always been interested in Jeff Winehouse's story. It's kind of makes it kind of serious. We think we have freedom of speech and all that stuff, and freedom to write, but it can get pretty serious when you report on the wrong thing. So yeah, it's pretty crazy. Something I've been thinking a lot about lately, not lately, last night to stay, after Wes spoke on it yesterday, was progress and how we view progress. I think we need to be careful not to mix it with corruption, because sometimes it seems that progress is what made the Thompson family come back to the States. They lost their ranch in Australia, I think is what the girls told me earlier when I was talking to them. That's not good progress. That's corruption. Progress is when I'm not wearing heels anymore. It's when it's when a garden grows. It's when we learn something. It's when a family grows. It's when good things happen. Jeff Winehouse being in prison, that's corruption. That's not progress. Ranchers losing their farms, that's not true progress. That's corruption. That's progressives using the term progress in order to hurt other people, and I think that's not good for sure. But yeah, our next speaker is Ryan Payne. But first, my dad's going to give a little bit of an introduction. I'll just say that we've really loved visiting him and his family. He was one of the first prisoners I visited in prison, and I had a really great discussion during that time. It was really fun. He always has a lot of good things to say. He discusses the Bible and just really deep things, and it's always encouraging and thought-provoking. So yeah, here's my dad.
One more thing on Jeff Winehouse real quick. Jeff Winehouse, he calls multiple ones of us all the time, and when Jeff calls, before Jeff will hang up on any phone call, Jeff wants to pray, and he always prays for whoever he's talking to, you know. And Jeff really cares for everybody. And Jeff's a good man. He's a God-fearing guy, and he doesn't belong in prison. This next speaker is Ryan Payne. He's become a great friend of mine. I met Ryan. Ryan's from Montana here. Ryan was a political prisoner, and in the Bundy case, he was charged in Oregon and Nevada both. And Ryan, I didn't meet Ryan here in Montana. I met Ryan visiting him in prison during the Bundy case. We had some great visits and talks in prison, and I learned a lot from Ryan. And I wanted to give this introduction to him before he came up here. But come on up, Ryan, if you're ready. Ryan's still facing some decisions that hasn't been made yet. The Supreme Court, the appeals court, is attempting to retry Ryan in a new case in the same charges, I guess, with the Bundys. So them answers haven't came back yet, but that might be not what he's going to talk about tonight. But I just wanted to bring it up. Thanks for coming tonight, Ryan. Yeah.
Is it okay if I forgo the microphone? Can you guys hear me? Sometimes I move around a lot, so I don't want to be married to a position, if you will, politically or otherwise. That's right. Thanks, John. we're missing a lot of that. What John just displayed, a genuine concern for each other, and I don't necessarily think that we're lacking the concern so much as we are the fortitude to come to each other's aid when it's necessary. So I wanted to have a little bit more of a open discussion, if we could. When John and Roger mentioned speaking at their event, which I saw as more of a campaign platform, and I would love to hurry up and get over what I have to say so that we can hear some of the wonderful things they have to say. I asked him what would people like to hear, because I'd hate to waste your time. You're all here to hear, to listen to people speak on issues that we're passionate about, and obviously you're passionate about. You showed up. John brought up that people like the Bundys and the actions that we had taken. Just by a show of hands real quick, who here is not familiar with the Nevada Bundy Ranch ordeal in 2014 or the Oregon deal in Malheur? Does anybody not know about those things? Okay. So without going into the details of those, I wanted to speak on the subject matter that we were addressing at the time, which is what culminated in those events, particularly Oregon. The things in Nevada happened so quickly that we didn't have a lot of time to implement, lasting strategy. It was more about, let's protect these people and let's protect their property. In Oregon, we had a lot of time to ruminate on how we should approach it, and we had obviously done a lot of research before we went into those places. And that research was mostly on how did the founders obtain liberty for us, the liberty we are rapidly losing today. And how can we apply that to the current situation? If things are very difficult, then you're probably on the brink of something great. That's something we should have in our minds. When things become very difficult to achieve, that's when it pulls the best out of us. And those are the pages of history that we read. So don't be scared. or be fear, but in awe, as we are of that above. It's not a fear of as in being scared, it's a fear in reverence, and the honor to have the opportunity to be the best we can be. So the founders gave us they preserved their operation, their strategy. They wrote a lot of letters back and forth after the Revolutionary era, and we can glean not only what kind of men they were, but what were the thoughts that they had, what were the actions that they pursued. And it's difficult to really get to the bottom of that because history is being rewritten, as most of you are probably aware. So when we would go talk to these communities, it was very difficult to bridge the gap of frankly, ignorance on how the founders accomplished what they accomplished. The Declaration of Independence. We're not familiar with these documents that proclaim a method and a means by which we can garner and maintain liberty. They also they secured it, they codified it in many of the state constitutions in the western half of the United States. These states shall have laws that are in conformance with the principles of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, is right in the Nevada Constitution, for instance. What are the principles of the Declaration of Independence, is the question. And how do we pursue implementing those principles when we establish a government that thereby makes the principles of the Declaration of Independence and their pursuance illegal? And that's why it always requires great fortitude. Some interesting perspectives on that have come from some of our country's most tyrannical leaders. Ulysses S. Grant said that the people have an inherent right to revolution. To be accurate, the word revolution is difficult to palate. It doesn't set well on the palate for a lot of people. And revolution doesn't mean a violent uprising. That's what we've all been told. Revolution means a cycle, something that repeats, it revolves. It has similar points throughout history that have the same circumstances, and they always come around again. So revolution is, in this sense, the revolutionary cycle of societies and their government has been individual liberty. There's 7 stages. I'm going to go over a couple of them to sort of sum it up and get to the meat here. But there's individual liberty, and in order to maintain individual liberty, people generally associate with one another, and they establish civil body politics. A civil body politic, for instance, the United States government is a civil body politic, a very extended one because it's far away from most of us. But your municipal governments, these are all civil body politics. Civil body politics are put there to secure lives, liberty, and property. Over time, so in order to have these civil body politics, we agree communally to give over some of our inherent God-given rights. We agree to give over some of that power to a representative body so that they can execute the will of the people. Unfortunately, over time, it has, without fail, shown itself that people who acquire these positions of power will eventually become corrupt, and they'll misuse that power to the abuse of the very people that they were sworn to protect. It's just an unfortunate fact, and we're all aware of that. So, how then can we regain that power that we've given them, which is the power ultimately over the sword, as we're hearing here tonight? The power over the sword, it's the power over force, and we give the government that force. It's our force. We have the natural right to defend ourselves, but we give that power over to the government so that they can defend us from one another, is the idea. When they use the force that we give us against us, they use the power of the sword, which is our sword, that we give them, and they use that against the people. There can never be no remedy for the people. There is always an option. Because the government doesn't have rights, the government has certain powers enumerated in our law, the Constitution, that we restrained the government to. When it acts outside of those powers, or to the detriment of life, liberty, and property, we gave them that power. Therefore, we don't ever submit it eternally. We didn't eternally give the government. The only government that is permanent is one that abides by the will of the people. So the permanency of government should not be an American concept. We shouldn't have a desire to tear down institutions that are very difficult to build, require blood, sweat, tears, and all of that. We should be very careful about those institutions and give them the respect that they're due when they're acting respectfully. But when they're not acting respectfully, much as a parent addresses a child, I like to call it the ask, tell, make policy. First, I ask my child to do something, and if they don't do it, then I tell them to do it. And then if they don't do it, then, well, we have to make them do it or do it with them or something like that. In this instance, you can't make the government do anything. Which I want to talk about a brief point real quick, and that's the notion that we're going to reform the government. This not only has government reform never happened in history, it has never happened. It continues to progress in the wrong direction until finally the people are fed up enough with it that they throw the chains of that corrupt government off and they form a new one. Whereas the founders did, they formed a new government and then they threw off those chains. That's what I want to go into a little bit today. So in Oregon, we were helping the community to organize meetings like this, and we were giving talks and speeches and town halls and such, open forums for the people to come together and hear the ideas that we were expressing about how the founders obtained liberty, what it took, what the mechanisms were. We often hear a lot about problems. We talk about problems a lot, and we have to talk about problems a lot. We should spend a lot more time talking about problems than we do acting on what it takes to fix those problems, because the things we're talking about are extremely severe. They're difficult issues, and they affect each other. They affect all of our lives. So we should be very careful about them and consider them thoughtfully. But sometimes we spend so much time talking about what the problems are and even discussing solutions that we fail to act on even what might appear not to be the best solution. Sometimes the best solution isn't the one that we pursue. And if we could be thoughtful and then decide we need to act on something. So what I want to talk about is actions. A short disclaimer at the moment: I'm not endorsing that you pursue these activities yourself. If you do pursue them, I think there's a lot of people who would be behind you. More or less, I'm just giving an overview of what we were talking about at that time, and take from it what you will. If you want to know more, then I'd be glad to share, more of the details with you. That time doesn't allow us here tonight. So, one of the main things that we were discussing was committees of safety. By a show of hands, who here has heard of a committee of safety? So much less than half. Would anybody be shocked to know that the Declaration of Independence was signed and written, voted upon by the United Committees of Safety of the colonies of the United States? There were no United States at the time, they were all colonies, right? Committees of safety were originally implemented by the colonists when they came over to America, and they didn't have any governments. So they had to organize for their own defense amongst themselves. And so they established civil body politics called committees of safety. And a committee of safety is exactly what it sounds like. It's a group of individuals who are nominated, voted in by the whatever civil body we're talking about, and they're given the power over the sword to organize the people if they need to defend themselves at that time from Native American attacks, from any type of situation they would need to defend themselves from. And they were the law enforcement. They established the law. These civil body politics operated as an executive body. And when they needed to defend themselves, they had that power now. They had that unity, right? They weren't individuals who were trying to secure their livelihoods. They were their neighbor helping each other. And these committees of safety had been essentially dissolved by the time the British became more heavily involved in the colonies, because the British government started to implement government in these colonies. And even the legislations, which were committees of safety that they replaced, or excuse me, that they didn't replace, they got their people in there. They also started putting in British judges, what were called mandamus judges. So the courts that the colonists had devised, they had erected these courts, this justice system, and the British came in and started writing writs of mandamus to appoint judges to the colonist courts. Then these British judges would, of course, rule not in favor of the colonists' rights. So liberty was lost very quickly. At that time, when things started to get really bad, very much after not long after the French and Indian War, the colonists started to re-erect their committees of safety. They started to re-found this idea. They weren't that far from having established republican governments themselves, so they just reorganized under that guise. The difficulty with this is that the British government still ruled the colonies. They started a new government within the purview of the British government. It's a parallel government. And they started operating as a government, the will of the people, directly. It's called a grassroots movement, right? We're all familiar with that. So they started erecting their own governments to serve their communities. And eventually, after a few years, this started in the early 1770s. After a few years, they came to the point where those committees of safety needed to defend the people from British oppression. And so John Hancock was the first one. We've all heard of him. John Hancock wrote a declaration, and he spread it to every committee of safety in the colonies. This declaration urged all of the colonists to form their own committees of safety, that the legislatures had been corrupted, the courts had been corrupted, every facet of the government that they were under had been corrupted. Then we who are not corrupt and have agreement and have the courage to do so, we need to start governing ourselves the way that we desire to be governed, which is another thing enshrined in the Declaration of Independence. The consent of the governed is required for a government to have legitimacy. And silence is consent, by the way. So we were talking to the people of Oregon, of Harney County, Oregon, about the corruption that they were enduring, and not just corruption, but it had come to the point of persecution and oppression, and people being jailed, and people's lands being stolen from them, corrupt corporate agreements being made between the government and international corporations to export United States resources. Aside from United States resources, these are the resources of the people of Harney County that were being exported or lining up deals to be exported with foreign countries, with Russia, no less. One of the countries that many people, I'm not sure what I don't have a solid personal opinion on this, but the notion that Russia would be an enemy of the United States. So these agreements were being made. It's just a demonstration of the corruption that existed there. 70% of that population in Harney County, by the way, is either federal employees on some form of federal entitlement, or is a private contractor that the bulk of their income, the bulk of their contracts came from government contracts. Government employees make up the vast majority. We're talking about a very small county, but in Montana terms, it's pretty normal. It's 7,000 to 10,000 people. 70% of that, so 7,000 federal employees in a county this size. So the difficulty is that you have a populace now which has been consumed with the desire for federal spending, and they've allowed themselves to be aligned in many ways with whatever it was that the federal government wanted to do in that county, and they had their voting bloc. But what about the other 30%? Does the other 30% lack any redress? They're being persecuted, they're having their lands taken. Are they simply to sit there and take it? There's many ideas that people have espoused. We're familiar with tyranny of the majority. But the idea that one man who is in the right is not allowed to defend himself from 100 people who are in the wrong is also not an American idea. We live by the ideal of right over might. Not that the strong are the ones who win, but that those who are doing the right thing are the ones who will ultimately be victorious. And I know that we believe that. We just need to make it concrete and act on it. Is it hard to hear back there? Okay. Yeah. I don't like microphones. So 60 people there, not much more than are here now. And this is an extreme idea, that they would start their own government body within an already existing government's jurisdiction. The problem is that a government loses legitimacy once it departs from the charter that establishes it. We establish governments and we put laws on the government called constitutions or charters. Sure. That's an agreement. It's a compact between the people who form it and the entity that is formed. And as soon as that contract is violated, we abide by the contract by obeying the laws that that government establishes, as long as they're within the purview of the charter that we gave them. They become an illegitimate government when they violate that charter. So there could be a whole nother discussion on how many governments do we have that are legitimate now at the moment. But it's a very difficult, it's basically unconscionable to people. And when we talk about the founding generation, there's this thought that it was miraculous and these were men of a particular fortitude that is just uncommon throughout history, and it was a group of very wise individuals, in mass of which probably had not been seen in history. But it wasn't those groups of very wise individuals that get things done. It's men and women that do things with their hands, that actually perform actions. So the fact that they could bring a bunch of people together, and these were the elected heads, are the ones that we're familiar with, means that the people had to be equally courageous just to put them in those positions, to say, these are the leaders that we're willing to follow. One of the main reasons to form these civil body politics is because we are responsible for our own defense, ultimately. If the government that we've established to maintain our defense fails in its purpose, then we have the natural right to self-defense, and we have a duty to execute it for the benefit of our families and our communities. When we organize those bodies to protect ourselves, the word militia is often used. Militia comes from a Greek word, militai, which means the citizen in his capacity to protect his community. So if you look at the United States Code and you look for the definition of militia, you'll find that the United States militia, every American who is a citizen from the ages of 17 to 45 who is able-bodied, that's the American militia. So by the standard that I just described, which is the law of the United States, can I get a show of hands for who is the militia in this crowd? Anyone 17 to 45, able-bodied? Okay, so we gotta lose our fear of these stigmatized terms. Militia is us. And that doesn't mean that it always has to be militaristic or any of those things. Militia is commonly found to be doing community services and things that are beneficial for the public, aside from just being ready to defend their liberty if they need to, or defend the law. The militia was also, in the early part of the United States, the militia was the law enforcement. There were not cops. There were no cops. The notion of a police force in the United States didn't advent until the early 1800s, and it was even limited at that point. So a police state, although it was the thing we wanted to protect ourselves against, it was difficult to comprehend that we would end up where we are now. So the reason that you need a civil body politic is because the military force, the sword of the people, should always acquiesce to the will of the civil body. Just like we're aware of that idea in our own nation now. So if there are a bunch of people who are willing to defend somebody, whose authority are they enacting that defense under? If they enact that defense under their own guise, then they can pursue objectives which the people may not approve of. They can go about actions which the people may not think are necessary. And so a deliberative civil body that comes together, a representative government that is put together for the purpose of defending the people, and has ultimate commandership over the military side of things, the militia, the defense, is necessary so that there is someone that can be answered to, and they should be the representatives of the people. So you need a civil body politic if you want to utilize your own right of self-defense. My part of the whole talk was the militia side. How do you go about doing this? Forming committees of safety, and what's necessary for the committee of safety to do, going into citizens investigative bodies, for instance, or what some call citizens grand juries. The grand jury was originally implemented in England for the purpose of the people to indict the government, to indict the king. That was the birth of the grand jury. It was not for the government to indict the people. That's another, our systems have been turned over on their heads. The Constitution is the shackles on the government. It's not the thing that gives the government the authority to shackle the people. So, committees of safety are necessary to delegate to the militia. Committees of safety also have a purview over the investigative bodies or the grand juries that are put together in order to investigate, pursue an investigation, possibly reach an indictment of government officials, and then provide a remedy for those indictments. And if there's no remedy for those indictments, we can talk about the problems all day, and we can even put together an investigative body. We can reach a conclusion. These politicians, these federal employees, these state government officials, our county government, whatever level of government it is that you're investigating, you can put together probably a pretty solid legal representation that would uphold in a just court that these people had committed crimes. The next question becomes, so what? So what? You have now a piece of paper in your hand that says somebody committed some act, and you can hang it on your wall, you can send it in letters all day, but ultimately it's just a piece of paper. Pieces of paper can only be a start to the process of getting something done. So putting together citizens' grand juries by committees of safety, acting as an executive body, establishing a judicial body, this is necessary on the path to actually protecting yourself from the government. Why? Because we have to show prudence that the actions that we take, which are so difficult to comprehend, the further away we are from the reality of what's going on in a particular situation, like Harney County, Oregon. Harney County, Oregon's, quite honestly, in the middle of nowhere. It's not nowhere to them, but it's nowhere to many of us. We're in Montana. A lot of us live in the middle of nowhere. So we're familiar. It's difficult to know what's going on with your neighbor 1,000 miles away. How can we justify that an action that was taken in a particular region that most people are unfamiliar with the circumstances of living there, the government situation? There's government interests that are different in one place from another. All these things separate us from an intimate knowledge of one another, and they allow us to question, is what they're doing right? So establishing citizens' investigative bodies or citizens' grand juries is a manner by which the people who are pursuing liberty in one area can justify to those who would ask, we took every step necessary before it came to this, before it came to actual action. After a committee of safety is formed, some of the first things they need to do are to be stalwart in their decision making. This is very difficult. It takes a lot of courage to start up a governmental body and then begin to govern. And you really can only govern those who you're representing, because particularly in Harney County, 70% of the people don't disagree with that. They like the corruption and all that stuff. Of course, they don't call it corruption. So they have to start to act. And that was one of the things we were prodding the folks in Oregon to do, is you need to start to act. Even if that action is only getting together and discussing things and calling community meetings and bringing people together to hit on the issues and hear what other people have to say. They need to start to act. The other thing that they need to do is establish, what is it we're defending ourselves from? Well, oftentimes we're defending ourselves because we're all neighbors here. And many of these federal officials, in this instance, they lived among the community. They were your neighbors. Maybe your brother or your uncle or your cousin. And so there's a lot of, this is infighting, right? This is what makes it very difficult, is that instead of somebody coming from 1,000 miles away to invade you and overturn your way of life and your government, now it's us. It's our own people, and we're doing this to each other. So you have to be able to put together the people that will have the courage to stand up for what is right, no matter how difficult that is, and understanding that that may put you in complete juxtaposition with people that you care very deeply for. That care and concern is important, because it's what drives us to not commit extreme radical acts at the sacrifice of lives, because we care about those lives and we don't want to hurt people. Sure. We win this all by love. We don't win it by hatred. And we have to love the people that are standing on the opposite side of us too, or else we'll commit acts that under any other circumstances we would find to be atrocious and unacceptable. So love's important. But the Committee of Safety needs to decide that some form of defense is viable, and what is that form of defense? If there's militia units in the area, if the sheriff's on your side, you're doing a lot better, because you already have the highest elected law enforcement official in the land on your side. This is very rare. Constitutional sheriffs, there's a lot of sheriffs that run on the platform of constitutionality. And then as soon as they have the office, and that's because the voter bloc is largely conservative or constitutionalist. But as soon as they become the sheriff, they start bowing to the same federal subsidies and regulations that have trickled all the way down into our most direct levels of government. And the federal government was never intended to do that. In fact, the county and the state governments were supposed to be maintained as a bulwark against federal encroachment directly into the people's lives. Once the decision is made to establish a defensive mechanism, it has to be put together, it has to be somewhat regulated, it has to be able to carry out that task. And the difficulty with carrying out that task is that emotions get the best of us oftentimes, and it's difficult to make decisions when we're rife with emotions. So there have to be people that can maintain a calm no matter how chaotic it gets. So the Committee of Safety has to develop relationships with these people who can help to defend the community. How do you defend something without something that has your sword, by the way? Because the federal government, the county, the state governments, we've given them over our sword in order to defend us, but now they're using our sword against us. So how do you defend yourself from somebody that is using your sword? And they're willing to use it, as we've heard. Well, you have to be willing to let them use it. You might have to put yourself in the position to say no. But saying no doesn't mean that you have to be aggressive. Saying no can be as simple as, well, you're not allowed to go in here. And then you just go there anyway. The difficulty with this is that it's going to provoke them to acts which are to enforce their policies, right? And sometimes that's good. Seeing the tyrant be more tyrannical is what provokes more people to be involved, to demonstrate the concern that they have for each other. And for those who have performed that sacrifice, it's a very difficult thing to decide that what we're endeavoring is simply to awaken people at the sacrifice possibly of your own lives. But ultimately, just waking people up isn't what defends people. You have to wake people up, there's no doubt about that. But defending people means that in the instance of, let's say, they've said you can't go here. So, in defiance, in disobedience of that, you do go there because it was an illegitimate statute or regulation or whatever it is. it was oppressive in some way. It was unlawful for the government to do that. So I'm going to go there, and I'm going to be there regardless of that it's illegal or I'm not supposed to. Well, now they come and take me away. And what good did I do? Didn't do any good. You have to be able to maintain that. And this is what often gets turned into looking like, certainly the media wants to portray it as an aggressive thing. Ultimately, it's what we did at the refuge. The land was being taken. It was not a legitimate federal claim to that land to begin with. It was, in all legal sense, it was stolen from the people that had been ranching that land for over 100 years. And the resource that was available to them was now somebody else's. And so what we did was we wanted to make a voice for the Hammond situation, of course, to bring light to that and to notify as many people about the injustices that were being perpetrated on the Hammonds, this ranching family who was one that had their lands in a nearby mountain had been infringed on by the government. They started a backfire. A lightning fire was headed towards their lands. They started a backfire in order to put it out. Anybody who's familiar with ranching knows you're starting controlled burns all the time. It's how you re-nurture the soil. This wasn't even a controlled burn. Not only did it save their ranch, it saved various other ranches in the area. The government wanted their land. And so they were coming after them with all kinds of legal pursuit in order to do so. And intimidation, open intimidation in the community, using the massive amounts of federally subsidized or directly employed people in the county in order to put pressure on them, ultimately to get them out of there. They want that land. They want that land. The Hammonds were indicted. They were sentenced. The judge in the case said it would be unconscionable for them to serve out the sentence that the required statutory minimum would put them in prison for. And so he sentenced them to a very low sentence. They shouldn't have had any sentence. But, of course, the government appealed that, and they put in a judge that would carry out the minimum sentence, which was 5 years. Dwight Hammond was 74 years old when he went back to prison. He put a 74-year-old man in prison for 5 years. It was a death sentence for him. It was a death sentence for their ranch. Because a ranch requires people to work it, and here were the two men that worked the ranch. So we wanted to bring light to the situation. But at the same time, we tend to focus on these issues, like the Hammond situation. But the Hammonds and the Bundy situation, they're not the problem. They're a symptom of the problem. They're the problem exposing itself to us. And we got to get to the crux of the issues. The crux of the issue in this case is a federal claim to land that they have no legal right to claim. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution specifies what land the federal government can exercise legislative authority over. Forts, magazines, dockyards, arsenals, and other needful buildings. Other needful buildings are in line with the other parts of that, the other clauses of that section of the Constitution, which are post offices, things of that nature. Things that are already within the government purview. They're not gigantic swaths of territory. There's no legal justification for the government to lay a claim to land within a sovereign state, unless, according to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. So they can have land and exercise executive authority over it, legislative authority over it, if it's a fort, magazine, dockyard, or other needful building, but not gigantic swaths of forest. Right. That's a natural resource which is there for the people in that community to utilize to their benefit and for their commerce and for their trade. Not a government 3,000 miles away, right? We've all heard that. It's why we started this place to begin with. So, we wanted to bring light to the situation, but at the same time, we want to address the real issue. And the real issue is the government acting unlawfully. Here, laying a claim to land that they can't. So we went to that land. And one instance that was a benefit, we were talking about the benefit of militia. Not always just a defensive thing, right? But there was no less than $2.5 million worth of brand new yellow iron. Yellow iron is like bulldozers and graders, very nice equipment, brand new, all the good stuff sitting on this refuge. The government had pitched to the people that they were going to spend all these tax dollars on this brand new equipment so that they could maintain the roads and other purposes that would be beneficial to the people. So we just spent all this money, that's your money, on good stuff so we can help you. Those bulldozers hadn't moved once they were parked on the refuge. Those graders were sitting. In fact, anyone who knows yellow iron knows that if you leave one of those large pieces of equipment sitting, it's going to rot, it's going to deteriorate, it's going to be unusable. It was a gigantic waste of taxpayer dollars. Well, we started up those graders. We started grading the roads. We cleaned up the refuge. There were construction projects that were unfinished on the refuge. We started picking up a lot of the trash that was around there. There was gigantic piles that rats had created in the corners of some of the buildings. We cleaned all that stuff up. We started turning this place into something that was actually for the service of the people. We renamed it the Harney County Resource Center. Because the taxpayers paid for it, we might as well make sure that they get the benefit of the waste of money that this initially was. We were trying to turn it into something good. Of course, that got perpetrated as we were terrorists and we were violent extremists and all these other things. Because ultimately, the statement that we made was, we don't intend to leave here. And we're going to stay here until a beneficial use of this place is realized, and until the people have the fortitude to take back what is rightfully theirs, that land. And so that process was going on. It's going to take people. It's going to take people coming together with a concern for their brother, for their neighbor. And that's what we started to pursue, was in the counties surrounding Harney, we had set up other meetings. And these were similar to what we had talked about in Harney County. There was an initial sort of couple field trips to go talk to the other counties and get them to start, promoting the idea of putting a committee together and that sort of thing. And we would come help them with the material that we had compiled, which was educational on how to do that. This was what they called, it was a virus that was spreading, and they needed to stamp out the virus. I think that what we were trying to do was be an antivirus. By the way, antiviruses develop naturally. They don't require human intervention. In this case, when there's a virus like tyranny that is rising up within a community, the people will naturally become the antivirus. It's going to happen at some point. What it depends on is how much pain have they felt, and do they feel each other's pain? When somebody's coming after you, does that hurt me? The tears we saw from this gentleman earlier. When there are people being imprisoned unjustly, illegally, unlawfully, do I feel that? And so that's why we were going to the surrounding counties. Now, interestingly, all the surrounding counties had the same issue. So they were very eager to the question of what do we do? That's always the big one. Talk about problems all day. Well, they were tired of talking about problems. We wanted to jump very quickly into remedies. Committees of safety, militia. If you don't like the term militia, call it something else. We're the neighborhood watch. It's whatever works for your palate. But the idea is the same, that we're going to defend one another. We're going to come together to defend one another. These are American ideas. They're not terrorist ideas. They're not revolutionary ideas, except revolutionary in the sense that we want to return back to liberty. And this is the way that it's been done in the past. If we're willing to be considered Americans, if we can put the general banner upon each other as Americans, affiliate with each other that way, then what does that mean? Is it attached to something of significance? Well, it's attached to this. It's attached to the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Then we can pursue those ideas as Americans and not be terrorists. And if they call you a terrorist, that's okay. They called them terrorists too. We just need to do it. So we were going around to these surrounding counties to start letting them have some of this information freely. There was no control required. We don't desire leadership in your endeavors. We're simply here sort of like consultants, people that care, not outsiders that have come in here to take over your operations and that sort of thing. So when we started to go to these other counties, there were also counties in other states that were interested. There were communities all over the country that were seeing what was going on, and they were feeling a desire within themselves to pursue the same things. It was on the way to the first of these meetings that we were stopped, and I was arrested. Lavoy Finicum was killed. A bunch of even more difficult circumstances came upon all of us trying to do the right thing for these other people. Certainly no pity party here. Don't pack the bags for the guilt trip, because we were all very aware of this. We went into these things knowing what the possible outcome could be. But the main thing that they were lacking there was those individuals that would not only let them know what could be done, what might need to be done, but also the initial steps in that direction. And those types of people are very few. And when you find them in your community, it's okay to rally around them. It's part of our individuality. It doesn't sacrifice our individuality to support other people that are of strong virtue and that we stand behind. It takes a particular courage to stand behind them sometimes, because if you get behind courageous people, then you're going to expect courageous acts from them, and they're not called courageous because they're easy. They're not called courageous because they might not offend somebody. That's who these group of gentlemen were. The Bundys, Lavoy Finicum. I think the people who are willing to speak here tonight are those types of folks. The two gentlemen that are running for office, my personal friends, and if I have a little bit of honor in my life, it is to say that I could be affiliated, that my name would be affiliated with men of such high caliber. We need to be searching that in each other and talking about what we can do. What we can do is look to the founders and the standard that they formed. Alexander Hamilton says specifically that in the Federalist Papers. He said, if the people are ever becoming tyrannized and oppressed, and I'm paraphrasing here, then they must appeal to the standard they formed. What is the standard we formed? It's right here. We need to pick these things up, read them, become intimate with them, research the personalities and the actions that ultimately culminated in theirs. Why do we value what we value so much, and what does it take in here in order to accomplish it? And it's there. I promise it's there. You just have to look. You have to search inside yourself and be willing to come together on those ideas. And maybe sacrifice the totality of your ideas. If we can unify on 2 or 3 things, or 1, that's better than 0. Find unity, develop that unity, and pursue an actionable course. Start to learn about committees of safety. If you'd like to learn more about committees of safety, you can get in touch with these gentlemen or myself. I would love to tell you more about the history behind that. It was effective then against the most powerful government that had ever existed on the face of the planet. We have the most powerful government that has ever existed on the face of the planet. It's been done in the past with the same circumstances. The particulars are different, but the cycle never ends. There's nothing new under the sun. It's just a cycle. Right before that verse, that there's nothing new under the sun, is a whole litany of verses in the book of Ecclesiastes, or Kohelet, that talks about cycles and how the sun goes here and then it goes there and it returns, and the water, the rains, they come down, they go in the rivers, they flow out to the ocean, they become clouds again. Everything works in cycles. Liberty works in cycles too. The great thing is that part of our conversation is to have one about real liberty. We're getting closer to achieving true liberty. That true liberty will be achieved when we can regulate ourselves to the point where we don't need a government to regulate us, to protect us from each other. But we're not there yet. So we do need these agreements between one another to enforce a common morality. So a lot of what I wanted to say, all of this rambling, to say that I would compel you to look into, if you're looking for solutions, look into committees of safety, look into citizens' investigative bodies or citizens' grand juries. Stop looking to the government for the solutions to your problems. The solution is right in front of you. It's right inside of you. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
I need the mic because people say already I'm too quiet. That was good. Can you believe that he was in prison? Yeah. Our next speaker is the perfect example of, well, first I guess I should preface this a little bit. I think, basically, I think he is a great person to vote for in this next election if you live there. I might be saying this mostly because I like free rent, but but yes, it's my dad, John Lamb. Oh, I just remembered. Ryan Payne actually brought us these because speakers could be using them to wipe off the mics between. But we're already contaminated. Two nights too late. Okay, yeah, but the next speaker is John Lamb.
I'm not going to really say much here. There's been a lot already said, and I appreciate everyone that came. I know Roger is going to speak next, and I want to hear what he has to say more than what I have. But for anyone who actually lives here in Madison County or District 36 that doesn't know it, I'm running for district or state senate in your district or your county here, and I'm looking for your support. And a few things that I stand for is I stand for the Constitution. I stand for individual rights and family values. I stand for the Scriptures, the Bible, and I think that's our number one guide to represent a people or to protect people's rights. And I stand for people's property rights. I actually come here to give a political speech where I do that, but I thought I'd bring that up and tell everybody, but I'm going to have Roger come on up and give his speech. Steve Wagner also has something he wants to say before we end here, but after Roger here.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I'm, oh, sure. Should I suck in my gut, throw out my chest? Maybe I should tuck in my shirt. Actually, I have handouts and flyers. Actually, let's hand these out. I'm handing out these COVID sheets. And I've got I'm also doing defund the police sheets. Now, this is going to be controversial in this crowd, but I'm a libertarian. Okay, I'm libertarian. I'll wait for him to. All right. My name is Roger Roots, and I am Libertarian candidate for state auditor. The state auditor position in Montana, of course, is the they call it the state official that regulates securities and insurance. And the Libertarian Party is the party of anti-government. All right, we want government as small, limited as possible, and we differ from people who call themselves conservatives in slight ways. We agree on many things, but there's going to be disagreement, obviously. And libertarians are different from conservatives in one big way, which is we don't worship police. We don't worship military as much as conservatives. Maybe some other issues as well. We tend to be anti-government across every dimension. When the COVID scam first started, that was around about early March. What was funny is all of us, of course, everyone here was getting news, and we were reading these news stories. And it started small, it was just getting started. And I had friends, in different, not just around here, but Facebook or whatever, all different states, Washington State. I had friends even in Mexico living. And what's funny is all my core group of friends, it's so funny, we all saw it for what it was, a total hoax. It's an absolute fraud. You know that it's about like the flu. Essentially, COVID has a death rate very similar to the flu in all age groups. But we saw that government was lying, constantly lying. And John, all of us, we're all, we talked on the phone. Have you seen this news? Yeah. Wow, the governor says this, and wow, they're talking about shutdowns, and we saw it immediately for what it was, an absolute scam, a con game, and a two-bit hoax and a fraud. All right? And, and then we would watch as our country descended into the absolute worst tyranny in the world. And I said, I posted this on Facebook. Remember, I said, we are now the world's most subjugated people. The world's most subjugated people. I thought this was supposed to be one of the freer countries on earth. We are now the world's most subjugated people. Even slaves in the antebellum South actually could leave their cabins, their shacks, and walk around. There were states where the governor actually ordered you in your house. Stay in your house, slave. It happened right here in the last couple months in the United States of America, where they tell you that you got to wear a slave mask when you go around. There's still states right now. In California, you're supposed to wear a slave mask right now. All right?
Washington also.
Washington State, several others. Even in Texas, we think Texas is a red state, Republican, well, the governor just ordered them to wear the slave mask. All right? And we all know they're going to roll out something really evil, probably vaccine camps or whatever. If we submit to the slave mask, it won't be long before the truck comes and we're told to get in the boxcar to go to the vaccine camp, all right? And I'm telling all you guys, do not, in fact, don't even wear the slave mask, because the next step is the boxcar, all right? Government is... Thomas Jefferson said that government is a necessary evil. All right, and we can all look at that, and we've had great speakers. I've gone through. This is my third night. I'm the most anti-government speaker. All right, I believe that government is an absolute evil. Maybe it is necessary. All right, I will hold that out. It's possible, but I'll tell you, as government grows, life and all that is good is diminished. All right, so there's even been so many studies, and I cited some of these the last couple days. In the last 50 years, there have been 11 states that actually started a new income tax. All right, so a lot of states are different. Montana is one that started a new income tax. Did you know that all of Montana's neighbors, maybe not all of them, I don't know, I'm not sure about North Dakota, but I think South Dakota, Wyoming, Idaho. Does Idaho have an income tax? Does it? Washington State does not. I'm surprised. But anyways, all of the 11 states that enacted a brand new state income tax in the last 50 years, every single one of them has gotten poorer in relation to the other states. Michigan adopted a state income tax in the last 50 years. At one time, it was 5% of the economic output of the United States, 5% of the GDP of the United States. Now it's 2.5. So it has sunk. By the way, Montana has sunk. We have higher taxes than Wyoming, South Dakota, Idaho. We are not as wealthy as them. Government is a cancer, and when you impose a cancer on a population, it gets poorer, sicker, and weaker. When you relieve people of government burdens, when you relieve people of taxes, when you allow more freedom and grant more freedom, everyone becomes more prosperous, more free, and everything gets better. As this COVID scam progressed, all right, and sometimes I joke, I'm destined to die of coronavirus because all I do all day long with all my friends, I didn't even know that I was such a leader in this movement. All right, I didn't even know, but you know, you get on these Facebook battles or Twitter battles, and you end up taking. And over the last 3 months, I've become the most far extreme, leader of the COVID scam explanation force. All right, so, and it's by accident. I didn't even mean to, but it's how things played out. And I would watch as these state governments imposed like I said, we are the most subjugated people on earth. There are states right now where the governor of California, for example, is actually ordering them once again, stay in your house, you can't go to the beach, you can't go to a movie, you can't go to a restaurant, you are to wear the slave mask. If you're seen outside, you'll be arrested. Washington State as well, arrested for a misdemeanor. If you're seen outside without the slave mask, you will be arrested. You can't go to a movie, no concerts, nothing. All right? The most subjugated people in the world. You go to Mexico, you're freer. Canada, you're freer. We are the most subjugated people in the world right now. And I'm telling you right now, all the greatness of America is because of anti-government culture. All right, from the very beginning, the Bill of Rights, the Founding Fathers, etc. Many of you, of course, we're all aware of the great speech by Patrick Henry. The speech that ends with that great line, "Give me liberty or give me death." Remember that? If you roll back that speech, that's a great speech. There's a line in that speech that says, "Suspect everyone who approaches that precious jewel." He was talking about government. And suspect every government official who approaches the precious jewel of freedom. Suspect them. Suspect that they're plotting your destruction. That's what Patrick Henry said. All right? And today we've completely forgotten these basic lessons that they told us. We've forgotten them. As this progressed, and I saw that Americans were submitting to this, and almost, listen, if these business owners in New York or wherever had if 100 of them in New York City had said, "No, I ain't gonna close. You're just gonna have to cuff me," it wouldn't have happened. It only takes a few. And if 50 in the state of Utah or in the state of have to beat me, it wouldn't have happened. But I watched as one by one there was this level of submission. I didn't know what I could do. I don't have a business. Now, I never wore the slave mask. I've not at one time. At no time have I put one on, and I'm not about to. All right. But what could you do? What could one guy do? And I remember when the George Floyd murder came down. All right, and I watched that, and I was like everybody else. Holy cow! You got to be kidding me! How much more are we going to take? And it wasn't long after that, you're watching the news, and I see this clip, this image come up. It might have been on Facebook or Twitter. It might have been Twitter. And it was some spray paint on a police car. And I remember that night, I texted some of my friends around the country. Maybe, did I text you, John? I think I might have texted John, and I said, "Finally, after 3 months of being slaves like animals in our basements, there's some spray paint on a police car. Finally." And I not agree with a lot of the horrible destruction that has happened with Black Lives Matter and these, I'm a believer in capitalism and freedom. All right, so I don't agree with socialist, a lot of these left-wing, I'm the farthest from that. But there's one thing that has trickled out, and that is this defund the police idea, all right? And so I've watched this a little bit, and, the Minneapolis City Council actually started to have open hearings on defunding the police and even eliminating the police department and considering other models. And I watched this and I'm thinking, yes, finally, after all these years, I'm telling you, I am one of the founders of the defund the police movement in the United States, all right? 20 years ago, I wrote an article that was published in the Seton Hall Constitutional Law Journal called Are Cops Constitutional? And just like Ryan Payne was talking just now, I researched, I spent 2 years reading old court cases of early America. There was no such thing as police force. From 1789, the year the Constitution was ratified, all the way up until the 1830s. That's an entire, 2 generations. There was no such thing as a professional police force. It didn't exist. The Bill of Rights was written when there was no such thing as a cop, believe it or not. The private citizenry, all of us, were law enforcement. The private citizenry were the law enforcement that the Founding Fathers anticipated, all right? Had they seen cops running around like we see today, mostly not in Montana as much, but in other places, armies of body armor wearing cops yelling and shouting at the people and body armor and tanks and jeeps and rigs, they would have denounced that as a standing army, all right? That's the one thing they viewed as the biggest evil that government could ever turn out, all right? And so I went on Facebook and I looked, you can search for Facebook pages. Is there a Defund the Police Facebook page? Lo and behold, there is not, okay? I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. This is a term that's getting all over the news. There's no such thing. Like, there isn't really much of a movement. It's just a word that's thrown around. So I started a Defund the Police Facebook page. I invite all of you to look at that. The Defund the Police Facebook page. I started it, all right? That was about 3 weeks ago, all right? And did anyone get I want to hand out, did everyone get the flyer? I've got these fact sheets. Here's one thing. Okay. One thing that I often say, I read so much news on police abuses, and you will see commonly where they kill somebody, they shoot someone in the back, they're yelling at people and spitting on people. Get down! I mean, can you imagine that we put up with this? They shot LaFoy Finicum in the back 3 times with his hands in the air. Shot him in the back 3 times, hands in the air. All right. It frequently happens in the African American community. All right, frequently. And I watched this, and there's all these proposals. The people that I think are most critical of policing in America obviously are not the right. Okay, I don't even know what this crowd is politically. I would say we're probably right of center, just guessing. I don't even know. There's probably some Republicans, some Trump supporters here. I see a couple Trump hats here, all right? I'm a libertarian. Some people say we're of the right. I disagree with that. We are, a libertarian looks at the spectrum not right-left. We look at it as authoritarian at one end, libertarian at the other end, okay? So we look at it a little bit different, not right-left. But by and large, the people who are most critical of policing are who? The left in this country. They tend to be the urban, often the African American community. They tend to be critical of policing much more than the right. Okay, that's something we admit. I'm a rare, libertarians are a little bit different than conservatives. And you see these calls for reform, especially from the left, where they say, well, let's reform, let's do something. They have these citizen review boards. I'm holding up something I just got in the mail like a week ago. This is from the Reason Foundation. How many of you have heard of Reason magazine? All right. It's a libertarian magazine. It's funded by libertarians generally. The Koch brothers. How many of you heard of the Koch brothers? They fund the Reason Foundation and Reason magazine. And I got this in the mail a couple weeks ago. And again, this is a libertarian magazine. And they publish, well, here's some reforms for police abuses. Things like restricting use of force, restricting chokeholds, making it easier to fire bad cops, increasing police transparency, body cameras. Now, all of these are they're great ideas, by the way. Some of them might work. The only thing that really works is budget cuts. Budget cuts. I mean, come on. All these other reforms, yeah, they work a little bit. The body cam thing, you know what the cops do before they open fire on you and kill you? They turn their body cam off. That's a fact. In the Bundy, I worked on the Bundy legal teams in both Oregon and Nevada. All right. And I sat through 4 Bundy trials. I'm the only person, not just the only lawyer, I'm the only person who watched every single day, pretty much, of 4. There were 5, actually, but I couldn't see one because one was happening in Oregon when I was down in Las Vegas watching the other one, all right? So I'm the only guy that watched 4 Bundy trials, the only person in the world. I'm the only one. There was a BLM, by the way, in the West, BLM stands for what? Bureau of Land Management. By the way, did you know people in Chicago or New York or Philadelphia, when you say BLM, they think it stands for what? Black Lives Matter. All right. So it's so funny. But anyways, I sat in the witness stand in Las Vegas when a BLM agent, a Bureau of Land Management agent, sat. I believe his name was Apley. Agent Apley. Who was there? John, were you there that day? Agent Apley was on the witness stand, a Bureau of Land Management officer. And he had a body cam, all right, during the Bundy so-called standoff, April 12, 2014. Agent Apley sat on the stand and he testified, yeah, I was rolling body cam. And they rolled the body cam while he was testifying and he was being direct examined by the prosecutors. And he said, yeah, I did this and did this. And then at some point, Agent Apley went down to the wash where these other BLM agents were, and they were all armed. They had their guns out, pointing them at the American people. And they were cussing, and some of them were joking about the people they were pointing guns at. They were just openly saying, which one will you take first, etc. You could hear them on the body cam. And Agent Apley, as I recall, he's heard on his own body cam saying, hey guys, I'm recording. And by the way, cops do this all the time. Hey guys, I'm recording. Watch your language. This is going to be in evidence, so make sure that you stop being like you are normally. So pretend that you're professional, in other words. So they stopped cussing. They were saying stuff like, look at that fat woman over there. And that's all on the body cam stuff that we heard in open court. And there was stuff like, who are you going to shoot first, and this kind of thing. Anyway, at some point, Agent Apley turned off his body cam, and it went dark. And he was asked by the prosecutor, who's on his side, he's on the prosecution side, why did you turn, maybe it was I don't even remember. It might have been cross-examination by defense lawyers, I'm not sure. But he says that he was asked, why did you turn your body cam off? And he said, well, I was mad. Okay, now we could have really followed up with some follow-up question. He turned it off because he was mad. The truth is, that was the moment when they were about to open fire on the American people. Thank God it did not happen. But they were about to open fire and start killing the American people. All right? He said he turned the body cam off because he was mad. There was another agent there. His name was Swanson. I saw him testify at least twice, maybe 3 times. Swanson had the best sniper rifle of all the BLM officers. He was aiming directly up at the northbound bridge of Interstate 15 in Bunkerville. If you ever travel down to Vegas, you will cross over that bridge where that happened. Swanson was aiming at the guy in the black hat, okay? And we now know that what he meant was Eric Parker. Eric Parker was one of the defendants in the case. The black hat guy, and he testified more than once that he squeezed his trigger, aiming directly at the guy in the black hat, i.e. Eric Parker. All right, Eric Parker now is running for office in Idaho right now. If you're watching live stream, hey Eric, good luck. But Agent Swanson was zeroing in with the finest sniper rifle in the entire BLM among those officers. He was aiming directly at Eric Parker's head, and he said that he squeezed the pressure off the trigger, and he was about to open fire. Why? Well, the American people were bold enough to defy the government, and they were bold enough to be armed, and they had to be killed. All right. Now, this is how law enforcement really looks at you. I know a lot of you are probably supporters of law enforcement. I guess I am. I'm a supporter of as small of law enforcement as we can possibly get, down to us, the individual, enforcing the law. All right. But anyways, the point is, this body cam idea, and by the way, a lot of cities have rolled out requirements that they're supposed to have body cam on them while they're doing their jobs. They use the body cam against us when they want to show you being arrested and showing that you committed a crime, you said the wrong thing, you didn't do it right, whatever, so they can use that against you in court. But when they're putting evidence on you, they turn the body cam off. When they're planting drugs in your car, which, by the way, some of them have been caught. How many of you have seen those videos? There's probably dozens of YouTube videos. Just go on YouTube and type in the name and type in a search. Officer turns body cam off while or he doesn't know that he failed. He pressed the button, but it didn't really turn off, and he's caught. He catches himself planting drugs or some bag of grass or pot or weeds or dust or whatever they do. They're planting stuff on the American people. They turn the body cam. They think they turned it off, but some of them get caught because they don't push the right button. All right? And then they get fired, and they should get prosecuted and put in jail. But anyways, right before they kill you, they turn the body cam off, all right? This is, and by the way, all these other reforms, the citizen review boards, where they have a citizen review will review complaints against cops. And so when there's an abuse of force issue, well, a group of citizens who are elected, folks, I'm going to tell you, they always get captured. These people who get put on the citizens review panels become captured, and they ultimately, they tend to side with the cops. I always say cops always sound reasonable when they're on the stand. They always do. I've seen a lot of cops testify. They always sound reasonable when they're on the stand. They'll sit there on the stand and they say, well, yeah, I did this, and well, I didn't think it was necessary to do that, so they always sound reasonable. And yet when you actually were there at the scene, which might have been 2 years earlier, they're yelling at people, kicking, get down, cussing at people, kicking, shooting dogs, whatever they need to do, whatever they think they want to do. And yet when they're on the stand 2 years later, oh, I noticed that he appeared to be nervous. He seemed to be sweating. They always seem nervous. They always seem reasonable when they're on the stand. And that's why I say the only solution is what? Budget cuts. Budget cuts. All right? Let's cut budgets. And by the way, not just of police, but of all government agencies. There's way too many government employees. We need to cut them down. I believe the future actually looks bright with all this. The COVID shutdown stuff is actually going to backfire on government, because they're already, even in Wyoming, it's going to happen in Montana soon, all right, where they're going to come to the taxpayers and say, we can't pay the bills. Can we hike taxes even more? Will you guys pass a bond levy, another one, raise your property taxes so we can keep these employees going? No, folks, let's say no. No, you brought it on yourself, Bullock. You brought it on yourself, Steve Bullock, all right? You're going to have to lay off some state employees, all right? Budget cuts. All right, with that, I will give it back to Katura. Rage Against the State.
Okay, I think we have another speaker yet coming up here in a moment.
No, it's not a speaker, it's an announcement. No more speakers. This is just a quick announcement. But yeah, budget cuts, deep and permanent. Deep and permanent. This is the meeting place for Covenant Community Church here in this building. And one of the things we're planning, and Michael Manley is kind of in charge of it, is a defense training. It's a high-powered 4-day defense training get-together that we're going to have with a professional firearms instructor. Michael, would you come up and tell everybody about it? Those of you that live in the valley, those of you that are here that have endured this long, you are quality people, and the invite goes out goes out to you to be a part of this. So here's Michael to give you a few details.
Thanks. Well, this isn't just another gun course. A lot of people in Montana like guns. This isn't for people who like the guns. This is for people who like defending innocent men, women, children, neighbors, communities. This is basically people who strong defending the weak. This is what we're all about. We've had a lot of, it's encouraging to be here with you guys, to see other people that believe similar to what we believe, because there's times when my wife and I have been having these discussions, and sometimes you wonder if you're the only one out there who might be having these thoughts and questioning what's going on. But there's good reason to be prepared. We've been putting this together for our church. I want to extend that invitation to you. It's a 4-day long course, $350 a person. You will be required to bring 1,500 to 2,000 rounds of ammo. You will be required to be able to undertake some somewhat physically challenging situations. We're not going to be doing Clint Eastwood style shooting. We're not going to be waving guns around and doing show and tell. The guys that teach this course are all either former law enforcement, former military guys. One of the guys, well, let's just say that it's for serious people only. If you take this course, you'll be better trained than 90% of law enforcement in America in real world situations. So this is a course where you will learn instinctive shooting, where you will learn how to coordinate, not just to shoot and run, but in a situation where a shooter or a group of shooters comes into a church, the men or women who have taken this course will know how to coordinate together to take those shooters down, to stop the threat, and do whatever it takes to restore safety to the community. So that's our goal. We have very limited spots, and we will have a mandatory informational meeting here on July 19th at 7:00 p.m. So if you know anybody who'd like to join us, they need to be at that meeting. They need to pay for their spot in advance, and you should really start looking for ammo now if you don't have it already. So hopefully most of the people in this crowd already have guns and ammo for self-defense, but if you don't, start looking for it.
One last thing, a friend of our ministry here, Brent Allen Winters, a well-known around the country common lawyer. He's an expert at the common law and the defense at common law. He's got a little booklet he put out. I'm going to throw a few down here. Anybody, especially you young people, grab one. It's called Don't Talk to Police. And it's why and how to stand and walk in your privacy and your rights not to testify against yourself and provide evidence. Also, there's a few copies of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence that he's produced with annotated by a common lawyer. So anybody that wants one of those, they're free to you. So thank you all for coming, and we're going to hang out. You can hang out. I got some coffee on, and anybody wants to hang out and visit further, we're happy to have you. Thanks again, everybody.
Guys, I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to thank Betsy and my siblings for doing the music. That was really nice, and for Seth and Paul McNeil for doing food, and just everybody for doing everything and coming along. That was really great. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Hard work.
How long did this take to put up? This time it's going to be a lot easier to connect it. Okay. Yeah, I have no idea what it is. Thanks for tuning in. I actually found it nice. Yeah, it's cold. Very nice. I think it's a little wet. I can't.